Today, I'd like to share with you two different approaches to Lenten abstinence. In keeping with the theme of this conference, Beyond Survival and On to Revival, I'd like to suggest one approach that might take you a step beyond survival mode, and a second approach that might inspire you to move a bit closer to a revival of sorts. Let's begin with a few quiz questions. Question number 1. Are you still preparing the main dishes that your mom was making in 1962? Number 2. Does a package of hamburger in the freezer give you a warm feeling of security? Most important, number 3. Do you begin to dread Lenten Fridays halfway through the Christmas season? If you answered yes to these questions, you're probably a meat-dependent cook. Now, this can be a problem because although the U.S. bishops allow for the substitution of a different penance, Catholics are still expected to abstain from meat on all Fridays of the year. Now, if your family is the sort that likes corned beef hash for breakfast, ham sandwiches for lunch, and chicken nuggets for dinner, this might be a challenge. Your Friday menu might look like this: breakfast, cereal; lunch, peanut butter sandwiches; dinner, macaroni and cheese. It might look like that for all foreseeable Fridays. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. That's what we call survival mode. And survival mode, if it manages to keep mom's head above water and the family more or less content, is a good thing. But this Lent, why not go beyond survival mode? Why not embrace Lenten abstinence? Some years ago, I was in the grocery store. I was walking down the produce aisle, and I was stopped in my tracks, literally, by a bunch of rainbow chard. It was such a beautiful thing, with its yellow stalks and scarlet stalks and green ruffly leaves tinged with red. I decided to buy a bunch. In fact, I bought 2 bunches. And I took them home, sliced and sautéed them. I found a recipe online. And I took the sautéed chard and I tossed it with pasta and a cream sauce. And the resulting dish was really out of this world. And you know, those 2 little bunches of rainbow chard and the delicious dish that came from them renewed my appreciation for God's gift of wholesome growing things. And as strange as it may sound, it actually changed my view of abstinence in Lent and throughout the year. It brought me a step closer to a desire to embrace Lenten abstinence. But how do we go about doing that? How do we embrace Lenten abstinence? I think there are 3 things that could be done. Number 1, to develop an awareness of God's providence. Number 2, to welcome the creative challenge of cooking without relying on meat. And number 3, to practice the ancient monastic tradition of mindfulness. Now that first point, developing an awareness of God's providence, I think of it as the Catholic version of stop and smell the roses. What we do first is acknowledge that God is the source of those roses. Second, we recognize that He has put the roses here for our use and our enjoyment. And third, we acknowledge the roses as one of God's free gifts to us. cultivate the same attitude towards all of the wonderful, life-sustaining foods that God has put on this earth for us. And you will have cultivated an awareness of God's providence. Number 2, nourishing your family without relying on meat. It's really, in this day and age, not a difficult thing to do. With the renewed interest in vegetarianism and veganism, there are so many resources there that allow us to prepare good, nutritious, and substantial meals for our families without relying on meat. Many folks choose to go without meat for health reasons or for ecological reasons. As Catholics, our reasons may be faith-based, but we can still avail ourselves of those resources. First among those resources is, as always, the internet. There are very many sites available that have both Catholic and secular sites that have information on good meatless recipes and meatless menus. Books at the library, books on your cookbook shelf. And something that I overlooked for a long time that I found to be a very valuable resource is simply friends and neighbors. Speak to people and see what their thoughts are. What are their tips? Certainly, every one of us has at one time or another prepared a meal without meat. Well, find out what sort of meals did these folks prepare. Some years ago, I was participating in a Mother's Rosary group, and one day one of the moms happened to offhandedly remark that she liked to prepare bean burgers from leftover bean soup. And a couple of the ladies there said, wow, that's a great idea. You know, I'd like that recipe. And really, so many of the moms expressed interest in this. They had not heard of this little trick before, that this woman with the recipe sent it out to the whole group, and we were all grateful to have it, especially when February, March rolled around. We were grateful to have that recipe for bean burgers. So ask around, and you might find some inspiration there. The third thing, the mindfulness point. That's the toughest of them all, I think, especially for us as moms. You know, for us to not only eat, but be expected to eat consciously, to pay attention to what we're eating, to eat slowly, you're thinking, there's no way. I don't have time for this. And it's difficult. If you're like me, there have been times when you've skipped meals because you forgot to eat and then dipped into the snack foods later. I'm not the only one who does that, right? Other times, I know that many times actually, I've eaten without even tasting my food. What a shame to pass up that opportunity to enjoy, to relish, to appreciate that food that came from God. It's something that came from Him. The gift, again, from Him to us. And we're not paying it any mind. So it does require a lot of self-discipline to be mindful of what we eat. But of course, self-discipline is a part of, in particular, of the Lenten season, of that penitential season. Which brings me to the second approach to Lenten abstinence, the on-to revival approach. Think about this. Many Christians from the 6th century right down through the Middle Ages followed the decree of Pope St. Gregory regarding Lenten abstinence. Pope St. Gregory said, "We abstain from flesh meat and from all things that come from flesh, as milk, cheese, and eggs." Now, I'm not going to recommend a Lenten diet like that one, but I will ask that you keep these rules of abstinence in mind while I tell you a tale of 2 Lents. February 2004. My son Vincent is angry. He is unhappy because his sister Rose, who gave up watching movies for Lent, except for religious films, will not watch The Incredibles with him. Because for reasons incomprehensible to Vincent, The Incredibles does not meet Rose's strict standards for a religious movie. Meanwhile, my daughter Grace, who has her history paper stored in Microsoft Word, has requested an extension of her due date to submit the history paper. An extension of, 40 days, because she's given up computer for Lent. Leo is pretty miffed at Claire because Leo has given up sweets for Lent and Claire helpfully filched Leo's cookie so he wouldn't be tempted. Family rosary is being delayed because Dominic is reciting his private rosary, which he promised to say each day during Lent. I can't indulge in a soothing glass of wine because I gave up wine for Lent. Whatever was I thinking? Lent 2005. This year, we have a plan. This is different. There will be no more penitential excesses, as in, honey, it's really nice when you squeeze the baby, but squeezing him extra hard doesn't make you extra nice. It only makes the baby spit up. No more penitential conflicts. Mom, as a Lenten sacrifice, I was going to go to the store and do the grocery shopping for you, but Ben had to take the car to drive to Stations of the Cross, so I couldn't go to the grocery store. And by the way, I finished the milk. There would be no more tests of Mom's sleep-deprived memory. Okay, now tell me again, which of you kids can't have dessert because you gave up sweets for Lent? Finally, there would be no more conundrums requiring the wisdom of Solomon. Dad, I gave up computer for Lent, but I didn't give up video games, so would it be okay if I played a video game that was on the computer? Our solution to all these crisscrossed penances and sacrifices was to choose a Lenten penance that we could practice together as a family. Code 1249 of the Code of Canon Law states, "It is good to be joined together in a common practice of penance." So we decided that our whole family would abstain from meat throughout the entire Lenten season, without restricting our consumption of dairy products. Now at first, my family felt like they had been thrust into the 6th century to do extreme penance with Pope St. Gregory and his flock of suffering Christians. But it ended up that not only did we get used to a meatless diet, but we found that there were a number of benefits that we had not foreseen to this practice. Benefit number 1, each time we sat down to a meatless meal, we were reminded of the penitential nature of the season. As the old ad campaign goes, "Where's the beef?" One of the kids would approach a platter with a hot dog roll on it, anticipating biting into that juicy, meaty hot dog. But instead, he'd find that the hot dog roll held a very tasty, yet meatless mixture of tuna, mayonnaise, onions, pickles. And you know, it would be a bummer. But that wasn't a bad thing, because we needed those regular reminders that we were in the season of Lent, especially with life being as busy as it is. To come to the table 2-3 times a day and find that the meat wasn't there, served as a good reminder. Another benefit was that we identified more strongly with the early Christians. The early Christians' diet was plant-based. It essentially consisted of fish and bread, olives, olive oil, vinegar, pomegranates, grapes. And in giving up meat, our family shared a common bond with those early Christians who only ate meat once, perhaps twice a month. So we had that commonality with them. Another benefit was that meal planning became a family affair during Lent. You know, as Laura Nelson, creator of the Green for God blog, says, you can't just cook a hunk of meat, open 2 cans of vegetables, and call it dinner. No, not when you're following a meatless diet. Good planning is key. And the thing is that I was not able to rely on my meat-based recipes. So I couldn't follow the usual plan for meals. Well, this leveled the playing field because now everyone in the family could have a hand in planning. There was no knowledge or know-how that I had that they didn't. So everybody chipped in. We all had an equal opportunity to invent or introduce something awesome, or maybe less than awesome. But the effort was there, and it was a common effort. And another interesting note is that we have a foodie in our family, my son Vincent, who, not coincidentally, is also the most Italian of my children. And we found out that Vincent had quite the knack for cooking and that he had a flair for it. And it was really neat to see Vincent and everyone delving into his creative store to help put appealing food on the table. And the whole family benefited from the project. Another benefit of going completely meatless for Lent, the saying, don't take for granted what God has granted, comes to mind. Practicing that during Lent really increased our appreciation for the things that were standard issue outside of Lent. Things like hamburgers and pork chops with gravy and pepperoni pizza on movie night. The things that we couldn't have during those 6 weeks became particularly appealing when we were able to have them outside of Lenten season. And everyone appreciated, everyone recognized the gift of all these goodies, more so than they had prior to Lent. Finally, giving up meat for all of Lent helped us to practice what Pope Francis recommended. He said that it is a good thing to practice living simply, to show solidarity with our poor brothers and sisters. And think of this. In India, the per capita meat consumption every year is 11 pounds. Compare that with the United States, where the consumption is 275 pounds. You know, when you look at numbers like that, you can't help but think that giving up meat for 6 weeks is a relatively small gesture to show solidarity with our poverty-stricken brothers and sisters all over the world. Well, what about going a little further? let's talk about our journey onto revival. And let's start with listening to something else that Pope Francis said. He said that the life of a family is filled with beautiful moments, but if love is missing, joy is missing. Nothing is fun. Now, I find it very endearing that the Holy Father should speak of fun as an element of family life. And the flip side of what he said is that when love is present and joy is present, things are fun. Think about that. Love and joy and fun go hand in hand, and they're supposed to be part of family life. Now, how can we make love, joy, and fun part of our Lenten family life? And what does this have to do with Lenten abstinence anyway? Well, to answer that, let me share what Catherine Doherty, founder of Madonna House, said. She said that the holiness of a kitchen is beyond the ability of human words to express. In the kitchen, we lovingly and joyfully transform the raw products of God's earth into food. This is a service and a privilege that is beyond compare. You show love for your family every time you put food on the table. I ought to know because I'm Italian. And let me tell you, when it comes to joy, I derive plenty of it just from seeing my family enjoying the food that I prepared for them. And I'll bet that your family, like mine, experiences joy in the camaraderie around the table. I believe that these beautiful moments that Pope Francis spoke about can be enhanced and strengthened, the bonds of family strengthened during Lent by doing just a few simple things. First thing is to pray before and after meals. Saying grace at the table is a natural expression of gratitude. And God can seem very near when the family is all together. It's a blessed time. And how appropriate is it then to say words of blessing when we're all together at the table? You can add novelty if you care to grace. You can sing grace. You can have each family member take a turn at putting together his own original grace and reciting it. If you want to give visual reminders of the season, you can keep your dining table covered with a purple cloth throughout the Lenten season. You can have the children decorate placemats with Stations of the Cross, drawings of Stations of the Cross, with appropriate scripture passages, with little scribbled indulgence to prayers. One year, my children made original Lenten placemats with drawings of scourging tools on them. And everyone at the table got a placemat featuring images of whips and flails. And let me tell you, I did have to do some explaining to dinner guests, but I think it was still a good idea. And it certainly accomplished what it was supposed to. Something else we can do to strengthen family bonds during Lenten meal times is to actually spend time at the table and to really converse with one another. In Jesus' day, meal times were very leisurely. Scholars say that the disciples would spend hours reclining at table, not only eating, not only dining, but conversing. Jesus enjoyed the camaraderie at table so much that Some accused him of being a wine-bibber and a glutton. I say we should take a tip from Jesus and the disciples. We should make a real effort to spend that time at the table. Again, the self-discipline enters into it. How often do we moms want to get that kitchen cleaned up and move on with whatever is part of the evening schedule? So it takes self-discipline to make ourselves sit there and pay attention to a conversation, to engage in conversation, and to encourage members of the family to engage as well. But it's really worth it. So yes, taking time at the table and talking and dining and chewing and digesting your food, that's a good move. I'd like to close now with my very favorite quote of all time from Saint Theophane Venard. He said, "Be merry, really merry. The life of a true Christian is a perpetual jubilee, a prelude to the festivals of eternity." You know, we can even be merry during the penitential season of Lent because we recognize the gifts of God's bounty. Merry because we strive to be conscious of His gifts and to be mindful of them. And finally, merry because the season of Lent offers us an opportunity to encounter Christ and to unite ourselves to Him in a special way. Allora, preghiamo e mangiamo. Let us pray and let us eat.